Step into the arena of minds. On this channel, every move is a clash of strategy, every sacrifice a turning point, and every game a battle for glory. Watch two players push the limits of creativity and calculation, as we bring you the drama, suspense, and excitement of chess like never before.
Hin. Antonin Stoloshe. Edmund Anadis.
Yazur Majidov storms the center with Pawn-e-4, a bold herald of war, planting a spear and daring Wesley so to react. The battlefield scent thickens. Wesley so answers with the Sicilian cannon. Pawn c5 challenges the center, a gritty counterpunch that screams, "We'll take this ground back." Tension rises. Knight from Gone hops to f3, eyes e5 and d4, a nimble scout preparing to pounce, posture confident and cheeky. Wesley so develops the bait knight to chicks, reinforcing c5 and glaring at d4, solidifying defenses while whispering threats at Jasur Majidov's center. Jasur Majidov rips open the center, with d4, ambition on fire, ready to trade and pry open Wesley so's position like a battering ram. Wesley so's c-pawn slashes forward and captures on d4, c5x4, removing the center pawn and leaving the battlefield messier, blood on the soil. The knight from f3 leaps to d4 and recovers material, capturing that daring pawn, calm, surgical, with a grin that says, "Not today."
Nen.
Wesley so brings the gate knight to f6, eyes e4 and prepares to contest the center, a steady piece joining the fray. Knight from bone to c3, reinforcing d5 and e4. Jasur Majidov piles on development, compact and hungry, like soldiers forming a tight line. Wesley so thrusts pawn e7 to e5, a central hammer blow that chases Jasur Majidov's pieces and creates spicy tactical possibilities. The battle truly heats up. Knight from d4 slips to b5, hopping into enemy territory with cheeky intent, aiming at 7 and provoking Wesley so's structure. Wesley so plays 7-6, shoring up f5 and c5, adopting a firm, pragmatic stance, building a fortress while keeping an eye on the b5 intruder. Jasur Majidov's bishop from Pawn pins the knight on f6 by sliding to g5, a teasing, annoying little thorn in Wesley so's side. Wesley so pounces with a6, kicking the b5 knight. "Get out of my house." A snap decision to shove intruders back into submission. That cheeky knight retreats from b5 to a3, sulking but alive, conserving life, plotting future mischief from the flank. Wesley so slams b7 b5, expanding on the queenside and chasing space. It's aggressive, slightly smell of grease, and invites tactical fireworks on the flank. Jasur Majidov's other knight from c3 storms to d5, a centralizing hero eyeing 7 and f6, suddenly threats to puncture Wesley so's stance. Wesley so develops bishop fight to e7, unpinning? Not yet. It's preparation for kingside safety and pragmatic play. Jasur Majidov's bishop on j5 swings in and captures the knight on f6, bxf6, removing a key defender and causing Wesley so to wince. Wesley so calmly recaptures with the e7 bishop, bxf6, trading pieces and claiming the high ground, symmetry and a hint of relief. Yazur Majidov plays c2 c3, fortifying d4 squares, and preparing to regulate the center, a quiet, practical move between the sparks. Wesley Zo castles Kingside. King's safety achieved. Rook fight steps into the arena. The fortress feels sturdier now. Knight from f3, retreats to c2, a repositioning that whispers, "I'll come back stronger," keeping the knight flexible and out of immediate danger. Wesley Zo slides the rook from a8 to bait, eyeing the queenside pawns, and preparing possible b-file pressure, subtle yet purposeful. Yazur Majidov develops the bishop from f1 to e2, finishing minor piece mobilization and readying castle rhythm and subtle kingside support. Wesley Zo's bishop from f6 inches to g5, aiming at e3 and causing mischief, a flanking strike, playful and slightly menacing. Yazur Majidov castles kingside, tucks the king behind pawns, and signals readiness for middlegame combat. Rook now poised on f1 for activity. Wesley Zo moves bishop from c8 to s6, centralizing and challenging Yazur Majidov's queen squares. It's a tidy thematic developing thrust. Knight from c2 hops to b4, ncb4, aiming at chicks and d5 squares. Yazur Majidov repositions for tactical potential on the queenside. Wesley Zo's knight on cheeks charges to b4, and captures that knight, nxb4, a sharp reply that snatches material and opens lines. Yazur Majidov replies with the knight from d5 capturing back on b4, nxb4, reclaiming material and reasserting presence on the queenside. Wesley Zo's queen slides from d8 to b6, pressuring b2 and eyeing diagonals. The monarch's gaze sharpens on Yazur Majidov's camp. Yazur Majidov pushes pawn a4, confronting Wesley Zo's b5 pawn, and trying to pry open the queenside with righteous fury. Wesley Zo replies a6 a5, locking the queenside pawns and solidifying shelter, a grim little bulwark against the incursion. Yazur Majidov's knight from b4 storms back to d5, returning to a central stronghold and keeping threats alive against 7 and e7. Wesley Zo's bishop on e6 slices to d5 and captures that knight, bx5, trading off the central jumper in a sharp exchange. Yazur Majidov's queen from dun springs to d5 and captures that bishop, qxd5, a clean, satisfying recapture that reclaims the initiative. Wesley Zo's b5 pawn slides to a4 and captures the pawn from a4, bfix a4, snatching material and creating a passed pawn-like nuisance. Yazur Majidov swings the rook from f1 to bone, rf bone, mobilizing heavy pieces, aiming down the b-file like a battering ram. Wesley Zo moves the rook from fight to sate, rf sate, centralizing heavy artillery and preparing to contest files. The rooks start to stare each other down. Yazur Majidov shifts the bishop from e2 to c4, pointing at v7 and lending elegance to the kingside assault. Bishop eyes become daggers. Wesley Zo's queen from b6 slides to c5, challenging Yazur Majidov's queen square and poking into the center. Queen duel about to commence. Yazur Majidov's queen from d5 captures on c5, qxs5, exchanging queens and simplifying the battlefield into more tactical melee. Wesley Zo's rook from c8 rockets to c5 and captures that queen, rx a5, snatching the monarch's envoy with cold precision. Yazur Majidov's rook, from A1, leaps to F4 and captures the pawn on F4, arcs F4, reclaiming material and clearing the A file with bravado. Wesley Zou's remaining bishop, on G5, slides to D2, planting itself centrally and menacing bone and C3 squares, sly harassment. Yazur Majidov retreats the bishop from C4 to A2, Batu, placing it on a long diagonal and keeping defensive cohesion, patience, and heat. Wesley Zou's bishop, on D2 strikes and captures on C3, bx-d3, seizing a pawn and opening seams in Yazur Majidov's structure. Yazur Majidov responds by pawn b took c3, capturing that bishop, bx-d3, material balanced but structures rearranged, a gritty little trade with consequences. Ooh. Wesley Zou's rook from bait dives down the b file to bone, and captures the rook on bone, rx bone, with check, a sudden tactical tearing of Yazur Majidov's formation. Yazur Majidov's bishop from O2 swings to bone and captures that rook, bx bone, snatching back the attacker and restoring some dignity. Wesley Zou's rook from c5 slithers to c3 and captures the pawn on c3, rx d3. That rook is a hungry beast feeding on pawn flesh. Yazur Majidov charges pawn, f2 f4, trying to open lines and pry into Wesley Zou's kingside, heart pounding, soldiers ready. Wesley Zou's rook from k3 rockets to cone with check, Akonio, invading Yazur Majidov's camp and making the king squirm. Very dangerous penetration. Yazur Majidov king, from gone steps to f2, accepting the battlefield's heat and moving to a less exposed square while under fire. Wesley Zou's rook slides from cone to bone and captures the bishop on bone, rx bone, removing Yazur Majidov's last minor defender on that square. Yazur Majidov's rook from a4 charges to a5 and captures the pawn on a5, rx f5, snatching a trophy and gaining a forward base. Wesley Zou pushes pawn f7 f6, aiming to blunt the rook advances and create luft, a gritty, somewhat desperate pawn shove. Yazur Majidov's rook from a5 rockets to a8 with check, rate, showing off the rook's range and poking the exposed king like a pike. Wesley Zou king from gate scurries to f7, sidestepping the check and trying to regroup under pressure. Not pretty, but surviving. Yazur Majidov's rook slides from e to a7, delivering another check, re7, relentless harassment. The rook plays hopscotch on Wesley Zou's nerves. Wesley Zou king from 7 slips to g6, venturing dangerously into the open like a general scouting a ruined field. Yazur Majidov pawn, from flower storms to 5 with check, prying open lines and threatening the king, spicy and loud. Wesley Zou king from g6 boldly steps to g5, wandering into enemy turf in search of comfort that isn't coming. Yazur Majidov plays g2 g3, stabilizing the kingside, creating luft and potential support for Fafau a5 structures, a modest but meaningful reinforcement. Wesley Zou's rook from bone slides to b2, and checks the king, rb2 and a, chasing the monarch and sharpening the tactical scene. Yazur Majidov, king, from f2 advances to f3, stepping into the fray like a brave commander, refusing to be cowed. Wesley Zou rook hops from b2 to b3, with check, rb3, a relentless little marauder, making life uncomfortable for the ruler. Yasur Majidov, king retreats from f3 back to f2, backpedaling under pressure, conserving life while the board royals. Wesley Zo advances pawn j7 g6, trying to blunt the f5 pawn, and to create breathing room for the king, a pragmatic shove. Yasur Majidov rook from a7 bolts to g7, eyes on Wesley Zo's back rank and pawn skeletons. A rook on 7th rank always smells like trouble. Wesley Zo rook returns from b3 to b2, and checks again, rb2 on 12, the relentless woodpecker, at Yasur Majidov's skull. Yasur Majidov, king from f2 retreats to gon, tucking behind pawns again, a strategic withdrawal, preparing to recompose. Wesley Zo rook from b2 slides to b4, repositioning along the 4th rank, seeking entry points or pawns to harvest. Yasur Majidov, h-pawn, h2 h4, bursts forward with check, h4 open to shove the king further and stoke kingside chaos. Wesley Zo king from g5 sidesteps to h6, trying to find sanctuary near pawns, precarious, but alive for now. Yasur Majidov rook from g7 darts to f7, eyeballing f6 and e7 squares, a probing hungry gesture toward the exposed structure. Wesley Zo rook from b4 lunges to e4 and captures the pawn on e4, rx4, seizing material and opening new paths of attack. Yasur Majidov rook from f7 strikes to f6 and captures the pawn that stood on f6, rx f6, a brutal counterblow reclaiming balance in casualties. Wesley Zo's rook from e4 slides to d4, repositioning centrally and threatening lateral mayhem, the board's heavy metal roams free. Yasur Majidov pawn from f5 leaps to g6, and captures the pawn that was on g6, fx g6, a sacrificial taste of venom near the king. Wesley Zo pawn from 7 responds by capturing that pawn on g6, hxxg, trading and opening the h-file, pieces bleeding, positions evolving. Yasur Majidov, king from gon returns to f2, re-entering the fight area with cautious intent. The monarch is still very much in the game. Wesley Zo king from h6 slips, back to g7, retreating toward relative safety, yet still stalking within range of the rooks. Yasur Majidov rook from f6 shuffles, back to f3, regrouping and aiming to contest the d-file, tidy efficient maneuvering amid chaos. Wesley Zo pawn from f5 surges to e4, establishing a dangerous passed pawn thrust and threatening to tear open lines. Yasur Majidov, rook from f3 slides to f4, meeting that pawn head-on and keeping the crucial e-file under watchful eyes. Wesley Zo advances pawn d5, striking at the center and freeing the d-pawn to become a spearhead for invasion. Yasur Majidov, king from f2 inches to e2, creeping toward the center to help combat pawn storms, risky but bold. Wesley Zo rook from d4 slips to d3, digging into enemy territory and preparing to harass the back ranks, a venomous placement. Yasur Majidov rook from f4 shuffles to g4, hunting for checks and looking to clamp down on Wesley Zo's pawn. Flexibility personified. Wesley Zo king from g7 steps to f6, braving the center as the endgame clouds gather, a king turned warrior. Yasur Majidov rook from g4 leaps to g5, probing the 5th rank, ready to swing and capture or check when opportunity knocks. Wesley Zo pawn d5 pounds to d4, charging forward to cramp the position and threaten to convert into a dangerous passer. Yazur Majidov rook from g5 slides to d5, planting itself on a central outpost, and aiming to stop that passed pawn while controlling key squares. Wesley's king from f6 advances to e6, centralizing and preparing to shepherd pawns forward. King's in the center now. This is getting spicy. Yasur Majidov rook from d5 retreats to g5, a tactical repositioning to keep pressure and maintain flexibility, fluid like a skirmishing cavalry. Wesley's rook from d3 charges to e3 delivering check, re-3-in, a stabbing move that demands immediate response and rattles coordination. Yazur Majidov, king slides from e2 to d2, dodging checks and marching toward focal ground, determined to assist in defense. Wesley's rook from e3 scoots across to a3, ra3, shifting gears to the queenside and looking for lateral opportunism. Yazur Majidov rook from g5 rockets to g6 and captures the pawn on g6, rx g6, a tactical strike that removes the defender and opens the kingside. Wesley's king from e6 bounces to d5, prowling into the center in search of pawns and an escape route, bold and hungry. Yazur Majidov king from d2 steps to c2, inching closer to the action and preparing to blockade or capture advancing pawns. Wesley's pawn from e4 surges to e3, a relentless passed pawn that threatens to gallop to glory if unchecked. Yazur Majidov rook from g6 darts back to g5 with check, a quick tempo assault aiming to harry Wesley's king away from promotion lanes. Wesley's king from d5 advances to c4, marching into the fray and gobbling central squares, a king-turned predator. Yazur Majidov rook from g5 slides to a5, returning to the e-file to challenge the advancing pawn and eyeball the back rank. Wesley's rook from a3 zips to a2 with check, Ratfund hitting the king and switching the theater to the rear. Yazur Majidov king hops from c2 to bone, tucking into a corner but remaining in the fight's shadow, defensive posture with stubborn spirit. Wesley's rook from a2 swings, all the way to g2, or g2, infiltrating the second rank like a marauder, aiming at pawns and back rank mischief. Yazur Majidov rook from f5 rockets to 8, rate, threatening to harass the back ranks and maybe chase the king. Last-ditch offense energy. Wesley's pawn from e3 storms to e2, e2, one square from promotion, and a terrifying baton, passed to the king's vicinity. Yazur Majidov king from bone moves to cone, trying to support defenses and keep the e-pawn under watch, heroically clinging to the back ranks. Wesley's king from c4 strides to c3, an intrepid foray into enemy territory as the e-pawn inches perilously close to triumph. Yazur Majidov rook from e-bolts to sate with check, r-sate, throwing a desperate piercing blow to disrupt Wesley's decisive plans. Wesley's king from c3 steps to d3, kd3, resolving to support the e2 pawn and stamp the promotion route closed. Game over, Wesley wins. That's the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really motivates me to bring you even more exciting chess games. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Monesei.